Hey, just a quick reaction to one of the Stick of Joseph videos that just posted with Jim Lucas. Man, that episode's fire. Check out the full thing. I'm going to post a few clips here because it demonstrates some post-structuralist thinking, which really helps me to resolve a lot of questions that come up with the Book of Mormon. Now, one thing you got to know about post-structuralist thinking is it's kind of like the Gollum of interpretations, because a lot of the problems it helps perpetuate, but I think ultimately it solves the problems at the end. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen or you don't know who Gollum is.
The other side of the spectrum, and it's a spectrum. In other words, it's not like you're either one or the other. Mm-hmm. It's not a black or a white.
Yeah.
It's a scale of gray. Mm-hmm. And sort of the other end was the idea that forget about the grammar or the style of the original language. Your job as a translator is to make it really good literature in the translation language. Mm-hmm. And if that means that you just don't, follow the grammar too closely of the original language, if that means that you use expressions from the translation language that have the same sense as, but are really very different from the kinds of languages that the original language had. Forget about it. Your job is to make it read well, read sensibly, really sensibly in the translation language. Uh-huh. And that's called either functional equivalence or dynamic equivalence.
Okay.
Hey, so I think this is really important because to me, the value of the Book of Mormon is when we can get away from the word-for-word translation and move towards the dynamic side of the spectrum, the functional equivalent side of the spectrum, because that's where we start to unpack and get out the most value for the reader, which I think is the intent of the Book of Mormon in the first place, is that the value is supposed to be for the reader as opposed to the writer.
Reverend Nida was not advocating that you should just blow off what the original language was. His argument was we want to make it formal. We want to make it dignified. Mm-hmm. He was not saying make it like funny and jokey, like some really modern translations are. He was saying you got to keep it dignified, but it needs the first question the translator should ask himself is, how are the people that I'm translating this for going to take it? Are they going to understand it? Is this going to move them the way the Word of God should move them? Mm-hmm. That was kind of his
Makes
thing.
Sense.
And, if that means that you have to kind of drift away from the Hebrew or the Greek to really get the message over, then the translator should consider doing that. That was basically his argument.
Okay.
Hey, so I'm with Reverend Nida on this one. I think that the whole purpose of the translation of the scriptures, especially the Book of Mormon, is so that we can understand and liken it to ourselves. There's a great explanation for one of the reasons why Nephi was quick to point out that he was well trained in all the learning of his father. But then he goes on to say, nobody's going to understand the scriptures like the Jews unless they're trained in the same way that the Jews were trained, like Nephi was. But then Nephi points out that he didn't even train his own children to learn and understand the scriptures the ways of the Jews, and that Nephi focused on likening the scriptures to themselves because that's how they would profit and learn. And then on top of that, Nephi just throws in a bunch of Isaiah's words and just talks about how powerful Isaiah is with little to no commentary about them. Because he hoped that the skill that we would develop as readers was to just pull the feel and the understanding from the scriptures and liken that to ourselves and be moved to action, to be moved to make our lives better and come unto Christ. And so I'm with Reverend Nida on that one.
You've got a really popular translation of the Bible, but it's kind of old versions of the language, or, it's kind of hard to follow or something, so we're going to do a new translation. He said you should respect the fact that there was this pre-existing translation because that's what people are used to.
Yeah.
So, your first thing you're always asking is, how are the people that I'm translating for going to take
receive
this?
it.
How are they going to understand it? What's the best translation I can do so the people I'm translating for can understand it? So that was his basic philosophy.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right, so this one is really important because it helps us understand, well, if you can just translate it in a way that pertains to you or understand it in your own personal way, then what stops you from translating it in a way that you're just making it up? Like, why does the original translation or even previous translations even matter? And this sort of answers the question is because the original text and previous translations or previous declarations that authorized translators have made matter because they give us a frame or a context to fit our personal translation so that you can't just make everything up. You've got to find a way to tie back into the doctrine of Christ. And if your personal application ties you back to the doctrine of Christ, then you know, hey, that's a good translation. That's something that I'm going to use. This is a great personal application. Maybe it's even something that I'd share with other people. And so that's why this section is so important, is because it lets you know, even though the Book of Mormon's open to a wide range of personal applications and translations, there's still something to go back to, a framework that you fit within to help you know when you're still providing a good translation is when you have the concept of the doctrine of Christ coming through in your understanding so that you can move in a way that helps you get closer to Christ and not just doing whatever you feel like. Anyways, go and watch that whole Stick of Joseph video. If you're a person who has questions about the translation of the Book of Mormon, you're wondering why King James language is available in the Book of Mormon, there's just a lot of great answers to questions there in that Stick of Joseph video, so check it out.